Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our discussion on theories of organic evolution, and we were discussing the history of the theory of natural selection. And in the last session, we ended up, or we closed our session with the voyage which was done by Darwin in the HMS Beagle and his conclusions after the particular journey in HMS Beagle. So after returning after the voyage of in HMS Beagle, after his return, Darwin wrote about six to seven books uh, about the places he visited, about the animals, and he described many animals, many new plants, etc. And thus he became a celebrated naturalist of that particular time, and thus he became famous, and he was one of the authority in Britain who could identify, or who was a specialist in this particular or it was a specialist in the species identification, etc. And in 1835, in the Museum of Natural History, London, uh, a, a historical event happened. It's nothing but the meeting of two important personalities that changed the history of the world. So when, or as I said, the Darwin, even though he wrote six books on about the voyage and he became a celebrated naturalist, he didn't utter a word about what he had found out, and he is still keeping it as a secret, which is nothing but species will change, and that is under the control of nature, or species will evolve. So that is still a secret with Darwin, which he has only exposed to some of his friends. And even though he has published many books, he haven't explained, or he haven't hinted anything in that books about this particular theory. And in 1853, so we said or we saw in the beginning the shipwreck which happened to Wallace in 1852, and he returned to England after 10 months of his voyage. After the shipwreck, he reached back, and he was in the Natural History Museum where he met Charles Darwin. And they both, because of their common interest in this particular or in common interest in nature, they discussed about the different kinds of animals, etc. in the and his journey to Amazon and the shipwreck that has happened to Wallace, etc. And Wallace also uh, said Darwin about his next voyage to the group of islands, which is the Malayan Archipelago. So Malayan archipelago is nothing but it is a group of islands is usually referred to as an archipelago. So the next journey for Wallace was, or next journey that was planned by Wallace was to the Malayan archipelago. As I said, he was not an upper class rich, or he didn't belong to an upper class rich family like Darwin. And Wallace, for his living, he has to make voyages, he has to collect specimens, he has to sell it, and he has to find his living. And because of, even though a shipwreck and a life threatening event happened to Wallace, he again decides to go for the or he again decides to go for the voyage for collection, and now he's moving on to another place which is the Malayan archipelago. So such naturalists usually chooses the places where there is great diversity, because these archipelagos or the Amazon, etc. These are the regions where you can see variety of animals, and such variety of animals is uh, actually a living for such naturalists, because they can collect such specimens of rare species, and that can be sold to museums, etc., and earn their living. So Wallace was, or he also discussed about his journey to this particular place of Malayan Archipelago, etc. Even though they discussed many things in their first meeting itself, Darwin kept the theory, or kept his findings in his mind itself. He didn't disclose, even though they had a great discussion on their journey, etc. Even though they discussed for hours, he didn't disclose anything to Wallace about his findings on findings in the Galapagos Islands. So now we are moving on to the second voyage, which was made by our young Wallace, and it was in the journey voyage started in 1853, and they reached the Malayan Archipelago in 1854. So this particular region, which is a group of islands, as you see here, this is a Malayan Archipelago, where I can see it as a group of islands between Asia and Australia. So in that particular region, because these regions, as I said, they were very diverse, and Wallace was greatly interested in butterflies, and he was specialized in this butterfly collection, preservation, etc. And in the Malayan Archipelago, also Wallace collected uh, um, a number of butterfly specimens, etc. So the Malayan Archipelago, or the Malayan butterflies, suggested Wallace what Galapagos revealed to Darwin, and that is nothing but the same thing, that a species might change. So the species, or the specimens that collected by the different kinds of specimens that was collected by Wallace in the Malayan archipelago, revealed what Galapagos revealed to Darwin, or suggested what Galapagos suggested to Darwin, that species changes. So here also, this is also a group of islands like Galapagos, which were very close by islands. And here, Wallace also saw that uh, more similar the two species are, more closely they live. That is, when the similarity of the species, or two different species, they have more similarity, they tend to live closely. And now the question comes, why is this so? Why closely related species, they share nearby spaces or nearby areas? So Wallace came to the conclusion that new species do not originate at random places. They are at random places but arise near similar species. And this is what he explained. So previously, or this is the butterflies, as you can see here, the butterflies, actually they show the many similar characters, and they belong to different islands, and they were designated as different species because they had many differences and also similarities. And the same you can see here. So this is what the butterflies of Amazon. So the Amazon butterflies were also the same. In different areas, you can see different types of butterflies. And with this, he concluded, or came to the conclusion, that new species do not originate at random places. It is not at random places new species originate. New species actually originate near, or at arise nearby, or arise by, near similar species. And another question that came to the mind of our species, and he also suggested, well, like what Darwin did, is that species are connected to one another like the branches of a tree. And he also termed it as the tree of life. Another curious observation that was made by Wallace when he was in the Malayan archipelago was that mantises and whales, which were larger mammals, have the same bones in the flippers, which are the useless bones. As you can see here, this is either a flipper of a, you can see this as a flipper of a whale, and you can see that flipper is actually a structure which is used by the whale for swimming, and it actually acts as an oar. To function as an oar, just a solid piece of bone would be enough, rather than making a fin, or rather than making this particular flipper of the whale with the bones which are similarly seen in every mammals. So the question was that if God had created whales and other aquatic mammals, wouldn't he skipped the useless finger bones? That means if God had created, if special creation theory was right, why did God invest such bones in an organ which does not have such function? The function of a flipper was to act as an oar, and to act as an oar, a solid bone would be enough. A solid piece of bone would be enough rather than making many pieces of bones and building up a flipper. So these questions are, and also the other questions was the imperfections like the vestigial structures clearly indicated that every species is a modified form of the older species. And what he saw in this particular islands was also he made some curious observations in this particular islands, which is the Malayan Archipelago. Wallace could clearly demarcate or clearly draw a line between the two groups of islands in the Malayan Archipelago, and he designated it as islands in the west and islands in the east. That means the islands which are, as you see here, this is a group of islands. If you draw a line here, there are some islands which is close to Asia, and there are, so like this. There are some islands which are close to Asia, and there are some islands which is close to Australia. And Wallace could draw a line clearly which could demarcate the animals, that the animals which or the islands which were close to Australia had animals which resembled Australia, and the group of islands which were near Asia had the animals which were like the Asian animals. For example, the islands which were found towards the west, that is towards Asia, had placental mammals, and the islands towards the east, or the eastern islands of Malayan Archipelago, that is close to Australia, they had pouched mammals. Like Wallace sees monkeys and orangutans in the islands which were the western islands, and pouched mammals like marsupials in the western islands or eastern islands. So animals of the eastern islands resembles Australia, and that of the west resemble those of Asia. And Wallace could draw a line demarcating these islands, and now this line is called as the Wallace Line. So the question was, why would God draw a line or a boundary between the islands and put monkeys onto one side and pouched mammals onto other side? And this made no sense. That means a special creation theory to explain this particular phenomenon didn't have any sense. And Wallace could conclude that species come from nearby existing species. That he believed that the animals from Australia might have come and settled in this particular group of islands, and the animals from Asia might have come and settled to this particular group of islands. So, another important uh, observation, or another important theory which was, or another important observation, or another important possibility that was put forward by Wallace is that during Wallace's time, many historians or many geographers believed that the earth was susceptible to changes in that the geologists usually believed that because of natural phenomena like volcanic eruptions, landslides, the surface of, or there would be changes in the structure of the lands due to erosion, due to landslide, due to volcanic eruptions, etc. And now Wallace thought the possibility that if there was the possibility for the land to change, that means for the conditions to change, that means because of soil erosion, because of flood, because of volcanic eruption, the surface usually changes, because after a volcanic eruption some area might be upper from, or the level from the sea level might raise because of a soil erosion. The level from the level that land had previously before the landslide might reduce due to this landslide or erosion, etc. So there were changes happening in the surface. So if surface could change, why not species change? That was the question. Or but what about the species? How do they change? Why not the same happen to animal or individuals that vary among each other? So these were the conclusions that was made by Wallace by the observing species that he found in this particular area, the Malayan Archipelago. And in 1858, after his long expedition in the islands, collection, etc., in 1848, he came up with the idea because to answer all these questions that was plundering his mind. So what he was thinking was that if there was changes in land which is happening, why not that happen to animals, and what might be the phenomenon that is causing animals to change? And it was striking that he came up with the idea which was proposed to human population by Malthus. Thomas Malthus was an English economist, and he had proposed the principle of population. And said that human population is usually held in check by famine and natural calamities. That means every time the human population does not go beyond a limit, it will be checked by disease, it will be checked by famine, natural calamities, etc. That is reducing the population and keeping it in a limit. And that is a theory of or a principle of population which was proposed by Malthus. And this particular theory, which was proposed for human population, Wallace could recreate this particular theory to animals. And this is how there was a connection for the questions. So, what Wallace proposed was that every organism, including human beings, as said by Malthus, is having a capacity, or every animals will try to increase its number. Every animal is trying to increase its number. And because he was a naturalist, because he was curious about specimens, because as I said, he was selling this specimens, and he earned that by living. So he could identify, if you collect the butterflies of the same species, he noted that every butterfly had an individuality. So whatever he did, if he collected different type of shells of the same species, each shell was different. Even though they belong to the same species, it was different. Like humans, even though we all are humans, we all are different. We all are different in our form. We are in our form means in our what you say, the external morphology might be same. That is two legs, two eyes, two ears, two mouth, etc. That might be the same, but the individuality of each person is different. The look of the phenotype of each person is different. The physiology of each person is different. The same thing happens to animals. If you observe the animals of the same species, you can see that every individual is different. And that difference, or what happens is, in animals also, in butterflies, in insects, everything, they tend to increase the number. Every animal have that instinct. That is the instinct of every animal, to increase its number. And it is now proposed that this particular increase in, or the tendency to increase in number, is nothing but every animal is trying to preserve its gene in the nature. That means every individual wants its gene to be present in nature. That is why it is trying to increase in number, so that its genes will be present in the nature. So when this is tried by every individuals, nature acts from the other side. So what nature does is, nature acts in the form of different natural phenomenon, like famine might be there, or different environmental threats might be there, environmental threats in the sense that the climate might change, the temperature might change, the pH might change. So different uh, uh, threats are from the nature. And when there are many animals, every individual cannot thrive in that particular situation. The same thing which was proposed by Malthus. That means to check the population. That means to decrease the population. So he suggested that how the population is remaining constant. But according to Wallace here, he recreated that in a manner that what nature does is that every individual, if there are 100 individuals and there is a threat by nature, for example, a famine or a particular flood, etc. So the animals which is having the capacity to thrive that particular situation will only survive. The others will fade off or the others will die off. So that is how species are changing. That means, for say, in a particular period of time, there was the animals of a particular kind of color. For say, if you take the case with some a famous example which is usually discussed in natural selection. It is with the case of a moth which is called as Biston Betullaria. So this moth Biston Betullaria, you can see two forms of the moth. One is a mutant variety which is white in color, and another white or a brown in color, and the other one is black in color. Okay, so the normal one is black in color, and the mutant variety is black. That is hyper melanistic version, which is completely black. The normal one is brown, which is having the color of the wood. So what happened for that, and what was that? Uh, Before industrial revolution in England, what happened was that before industrial revolution, all the wooden barks were of the normal brown in color. As a result, this particular moths, which is Western Betullaria, they had the color of the normal bark, which is the brown color. And what happened was that after industrial revolution, the soot from the ashes from the industries, they got deposited on the barks of the trees, and the trees of the bark changed to a darker color, to black. And what happened was that when the normal moths, they were sitting on this black color, they could be easily identified by birds. So all the brown moths were identified by the predator, and their population started to decline. At the same time, what happened was that the mutant one. So in before industrial revolution, you could not identify a mutant because a mutant, as I said, it is black in color. So whenever a black moth, so in any generation, a black moth can come. So when a black moth is formed and when that sits on a bark, it will be easily identified, which is black on brown. So that will be taken up by the predator. So after industrial revolution, what had happened is that when the trees barks were turned to black in color, this black mutant ones, which were less in number previously, got or they got a shelter, or they could camouflage in the black barks of the tree. As a result, the number of brown moths start to decrease and the number of black moths start to increase. So this is how nature balances. So they were of the same species. But what happened was that because of that particular change in the environment, so that was a man-made change because of industrial evolution, whatever be, the change that was happened or in the environment could change the species. That means if you get a fossil of the previous moth, it will be brown in color, but now the moth is black in color. Okay, so this is how changes in species occur. So that can be so this is just an example of what how changes happen to species. So this is happening to every organism, every plant in this in this particular. So this is what Wallace concluded from this. So what Wallace did was that his findings, he wrote his findings as notes, and he thought that he might take a second opinion before publishing it. And the person to be consulted was he didn't have Wallace didn't have a second thought to whom to consult this particular idea. So he just posted it from the Malayan Archipelago to Britain and that to Darwin. And Darwin got the letter. Actually, Darwin was really surprised. He was shocked because a particular theory which he had kept as a secret for the long 20 years is now revealed to another person in another place, that too in another place. Because Darwin made his conclusions in the Galapagos Islands, but the same conclusions was made by Wallace in another area which is called as the Malayan Archipelago. And now Darwin consulted with his friends and decided to publish or read his paper. Actually, during that particular time, when a scientific invention or a scientific discovery was made, the particular person will be reading it out, because at that particular time, printing etc. was at its uh, uh, in its childhood stages. As a result, what they do is that these theories would be, or whatever their findings, they would read it out in the Royal Society. So there will be many people in the Royal Society. Either they would dismiss or they would disregard the proposal, or they will take up the proposal. So Darwin decided to read out his particular theory, and he also decided that it would be read along with Wallace, because he also deserves the credit for this invention, because it was not a copy from some others or copy from Darwin. So actually, they both came to the same theory in different places. As a result, Darwin decided that it should be read together in the same day in the Royal Society. And because Wallace he was also invited to read out the paper, and Wallace suggested that, and other friends of Darwin suggested that, Darwin suggested to read the paper together, and it is the greatness of that particular person. So if it might be someone else, he might have first published the paper and taken the credit. So what the greatness of Darwin was that Wallace also should be credited with the same theory. So he decided to call up Wallace and read out the paper together. And Wallace suggested that first it should be read by Darwin and then by Wallace. So first it was read by Darwin in front of the Royal Society, and then by Wallace. And it happened in 1859. But Darwin read his paper, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, and Wallace named his publication as Darwinism, the Theory of Natural Selection with some of its application. And it was read out in 1859 and the 1858 at the Royal Society. And as we said, as the saying goes, great minds think alike. The same thing which Darwin had observed, and Darwin had Darwin's mind propagated the idea. The same thing was revealed to Wallace in the Malayan Archipelago. So this is about the making of the theory, which is called as a natural selection. So with this we come to the end of this particular discussing the history of the making of the theory. Actually, you can call it like that: the making of the theory, which is called as natural selection. And in the next session or the next video, we'll be discussing the important points that comes under this particular theory of natural selection. Thanks for hearing.